Today we're going to start Kuf Chav Gimel Halach Aleph. I'm going to read it now, but really we're going to need some introduction to get to really reading it. We'll read it again later. Let's read it for now. Stam Yain from Ovid Kichavim. The Stam Yain from Goyim who are Ovid Avodah Zarah. Issur Hana'ah. It's Issur Hana'ah who are doing Magon B'Yain Shalonu.
This is the first one in
Kuf Chav Gimel. Yes. Who are doing Magon B'Yain Shalonu. And the same thing is if they touch our wine, not only if it's their wine, but our wine. Also, we spoke about it a little bit. Excuse me? Well, no. We Kuf Yudal and Kuf Chav Gimel are connected to each other. So we did Kuf Yudal, then we moved to Kuf Chav Gimel. We even introduced the last time. If you were here, okay. So the Rambam says, Mishum Gzeres Yain Shenisnasich Le'Lilim, and the reason why there's an Issur of Hana'ah is because the Gzera that it was Nisnasich Le'Lilim, that might be Yain Nesach. We spoke about that last week, what that means. Ubezman Hazeh, now the Rambam says like this, Ubezman Hazeh, She'en Shchich She'umas Menassim Avodas Kachavim. Nowadays that the Goyim where we live don't pour wine for Avodah Zarah. We're going to talk about this all later as we go on. Some say there's no Issur Hana'ah, there's only Issur Shtir, because I just told you that it's only Issur if it's because of Chashash of Nei Nesach, so maybe it wouldn't be Issur over here. And so too, their Stam Yain would be Mutter B'Hana'ah. Okay, there's such a shita. The L'chein is, since I told you that the Issur Hana'ah is because of it might be Yain Nesach, so if our Goyim don't pour wine for Avodah Zarah.
First thing it says, like the Issur Hana'ah of Kachavim, ain't that's what I know. The Chain Stam Yain Shalom. What's the first?
Oh, if they touch our wine, Magal Kom Yain Shalanu. They touch our wine. I'll explain it to you. I'll explain to you as we go on what the point that is. Okay, the Chain Stam or Chain Mutter Ligvois B'Chayvim Reb Kachavim Stam Yain made the Havi Kamatz Miyadam. So one nafkamina is that if someone a guy owes you money and he's willing to pay you back with Stam Yain, so you could take it from him. Kamatz Miyadam, I mean, it would be hefsid if you didn't have it. For Dim B'Shar hefsid could go in Over Kana or Machar. Like if by mistake you bought some, then you'd be allowed to do it. Also, also like those but according to this shita, you would not be allowed to get into business buying and selling Stam Yain because it's not a hefsid. The yesh mekilim gam b'zeh, someone make even to allow you even to get into business. I mean, even to do it with terrible hachmer, and it's good to be machmer about this. To be like what? Where are you on Mocha?
All about the Kono, so now you have it, so you have to have a no, you have to say, Oy Mocha.
Okay, I'll say that's a din later on. Okay, Oy Mocha is a din from later on. Okay? You read it right. It's a din later on from, I forgot what's it. If I remember, I'm going to mention it to you. I'll mention it to you. Okay? So before, to tell you what this din is going on over here, okay, I need to introduce to you first some halacha, some kuf chav daled. Okay? That this din is like the opening din, but really we need to, the first couple halachas in kuf chav daled are really what help us understand what's going on over here. And that is like this. The Mishnah says, this din, Stam Yain Shalom Kachavim Issur Hana'ah, is a Mishnah, as we've talked about it, it's in the second paragraph, Chav Tes and Beis, the Mishnah says that Stam Yain is Issur Hana'ah. It's one of the things is Issur Hana'ah. Fine. That's very nice. And that's what the Gemara says. Okay, but when you turn many part later on Samach Dalan and Beis, the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that the wine of a Ger Toshav only has an Issur Achila and has no Issur Hana'ah. Okay? Now, we don't have Ger Toshavs anymore. It's only Bisman that the Ger was no. We don't have Ger Toshavs anymore. But the Gemara says that a Ger Toshav, whatever, the real Ger Toshav is someone who's makabel to do Zayin Mitzvahs B'Noach. He may have to be makabel in front of Bezdin. We don't have that anymore nowadays. But the Gemara, it's clear in the Gemara that when it says that a Ger Toshav wine is only Issur Achila and not Issur Hana'ah, for that din, there's a number of dinim in that brisa. For that din to be only Issur Hana'ah, there's no need for him to be a formal Ger Toshav. But rather, any goy who's makabel himself, who does not do Avodah Zarah, any goy who does not do Avodah Zarah, his wine is only Issur Achila and is not Issur Hana'ah. Okay? He doesn't have to be, for our dinim, for what we want, it doesn't have to be a formal Ger Toshav. Okay, and so the Shulchan Aruch says in Kuf Chav Beis, in Kuf Chav Daled, it says Ger Toshav, and in another case that I skipped, it wasn't important. What does Magon Issur B'Shtia? If a Ger Toshav touches wine, it's Issur B'Shtia, meaning, and it's not Issur B'Hana'ah. Okay, so a Ger Toshav who Ger Toshav, meaning a person who doesn't do avodah zarah, his wine is not asur b'hana. Okay. Now, I told you, I introduced you last time that the dinim of a guy touching our wine and stam yain, meaning the wine that belongs to him, are the same. Okay, the dinim are the same in both cases. But the Shittas Harash is that when the Gemara says this din that a Ger Toshav his wine, what his wine is asur b'shtia, okay, and it's not asur, meaning it's not asur b'hana, it's only asur b'shtia. He says that the Rosh says that's only talking about if the Ger Toshav has wine, meaning it's stam yenam of a Ger Toshav, meaning a guy who doesn't do avodah zarah. But what would happen if a guy touches our wine? If a guy touches our wine where he doesn't do avodah zarah. So what's the chashash is that maybe it'll be asur mishum b'nei sehem. He says just touching your wine is not going to make b'nei sehem. But it's not so friendly with you. He touched your bottle like this, so that's going to make it that you're going to get so friendly with him. He says so b'nei sehem doesn't apply either. So in the case, so the Rosh says in the case with the Ger Toshav, the guy who doesn't do avodah zarah touches your wine, it's completely mutter. It's even mutter b'shtia. Not only is it mutter b'hana like the Gemara says, but it's even mutter b'shtia. And the Gemara was talking about a Ger Toshav who has wine. It's stam yain, it's his wine. Not that he touched your wine. If he touched your wine, it's completely mutter. Okay? And that's brought in the Ramah. V'yesh b'kil nafil b'maga Ger Toshav. Some are makel that even if a Ger Toshav touches your wine, it's mutter even b'shtia. Al yain shalom v'adei asur. Yain shalom. V'adei asur. So that the Gemara says. There is a Gemara that says a Ger Toshav, his wine is asur b'shtia mutter b'hana. So the Ramah says. So the Rosh learns that those people. That's only talking about his wine. But if he touches my wine, it's completely mutter. Okay, now the Ramah over here just brings such a shita. He doesn't say whether he possibly that or not. Okay, for now you probably don't think it's so relevant, but next time we're going to find out that this Ramah is very negeh. Okay, this negeh, very relevant. Negeh, I touch it. Very, very relevant. Next time we're going to see the Mitzvah of the next time. Okay, but so there's a sheet of the Gemara says that if someone doesn't know avodah zarah and he touches his wine, is only asur b'shtia, not b'hana. And the Ramah says there's even a sheet that says if he touches ours, it's not asur b'shtia, it's completely mutter b'chil. Okay, so that's one Gemara. Okay, this is a background for getting for our din. Okay, that's in a Ger Toshav. Excuse me. Comes along, we're showing him it's like this. That din of a Ger Toshav is talking about a guy who doesn't do avodah zarah. So who decides that he's not going to do avodah zarah. Okay, so the Rishonim say the same din, the same thing would be true if you have Muslims. That is to say, most Rishonim hold that their worship, what they do, the way they serve God, is not considered avodah zarah, and therefore, the same way that the Gemara says that a Ger Toshav, it means a guy who chooses to not be avodah zarah, his wine is only asur b'achila, not b'hana. So too, the wine of someone who's a Muslim, he's a Ger Toshav. Okay, for these purposes, he's not a real Ger Toshav. He doesn't do the Zayin Mitzvah B'nei, but he doesn't do avodah zarah. So who are then that a Muslim, his wine is also not asur b'hana. It's only asur b'shtia, not asur b'hana. Okay, that then is brought in halacha vav. Okay, and the Shulchan Aruch says like this in Kuf Chav Dal halacha vav. Shulchan Aruch says kol ovid kacham she'ein ovid elilin. Any guy who doesn't serve avodah zarah. It's only asur b'shtia, which is saying that these Muslims have the din of a Ger Toshav. That doesn't say that that's not a Gemara, but it comes off the Gemara from the Ger Toshav. Umagon b'yayin shalonu shavel yenim asur b'shtia, and the touch wine has the same din that's also asur b'shtia. Okay, so that's what the Mechaber says in Halacha Vav. Now,
Ramah say anything on that?
No, Ramah doesn't say anything about that. Now, the Beis Yosef has a question. Okay, Beis Yosef has a question about this din about the Muslims. He says, how come when the Rambam says this din, the Rambam says, okay, why does the Rambam stick in Kagoin Elu Hayishmael? Okay, why is that important? So I guess you could read it just he's trying to tell you some information. You should know that I hold that that's not considered avodah zarah. The Yosef says, no, sounds like.
Sorry, what's the question?
When the Rambam says, why does he tell us that? So the Beis Yosef, he wonders, like as if why is he filling us in that Yishmael not over the avodah zarah? Okay, so we would have just said, well, you might not know that. I mean, it's a question in Rishonim whether their thing is avodah zarah. The Beis Yosef says, no. It sounds like for the Rambam it sounds like from the Rambam that the only time you have the kula of this Ger Toshav, you say that the guy doesn't worship Avodah Zarah is allowed, his wine is not Issur Hana'ah, is if he joins a group. He's part of a not, I don't mean that he has friends. I mean, he joined something. He became a Ger Toshav, or he became a Muslim. He became something that thing is not a thing that everyone's. I'm saying even if he became an atheist. He joined groups of people who do that. But what do you say?
Organized religion.
But if he just is not a practicing Avodah Zarah, I mean, in theory he's an Avodah Zarah, but he just doesn't do it. He just doesn't do it. Unless he never goes to wherever he does his worship. Then the Bishop says maybe in that case he doesn't have this kula that his wine is not Issur Hana'ah, and maybe that's why the Rambam says Kol he wants they have to join the group. Bishop in the end says this.
The moment before something, he's not a Kashrus, like his avoidance does not require Issur.
We're not to our Rambam yet. You're not to our Rambam yet. I thought we do Kol Hour first.
That's what the Rambam comes to tell you.
That what?
That the whole religion is not in Kashrus. Not in Kashrus.
So the Beis Yosef says his first thinking is that the Rambam is saying is you have to be something where we do something but we don't do Avodah Zarah. Okay? But the Beis Yosef in the end does not agree with that. Okay, he thinks that's not correct. And the Shachas B'Daita, if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, look at what it says. It's Kol She'ein Oved Elilim. He doesn't say K'koyin Elohe Yishmeinu. Okay, because the Shachas B'Daita, that the Beis Yosef calls like a second teretz, which is that the truth is any guy who decides he's not doing Avodah Zarah, that guy, his wine is not Issur Hana'ah. Okay, so that's why it says Kol She'ein Oved Elilim. He doesn't do Avodah Zarah. He does not do Avodah Zarah. That guy is not, his wine is not Issur Hana'ah. Okay. So now we're ready to see back to our din. Okay, now, our din, the Ramah is about Catholics. Okay? The what do they call them? The Zman is that our Ovdei Kechavim, the Ovdei Kechavim where the Ramah lived, okay, they were Muslims. The Ovdei Kechavim where he lived were Catholics. Most Rishonim hold that what they do is Avodah Zarah. Okay? The way they serve, whatever they do is considered Avodah Zarah. Not only that, they even use, the Beis Yosef points out, they even use wine in their service in a way that would make it usher. It would be takruvus Avodah Zarah. Okay, they use wine in their service. But, they don't pour their wine. They don't make any yainis. Okay, the Goyim, this is the Rambam, the Goyim don't pour wine for Avodah Zarah. So they are even Avodah Zarah. What they do is an Avodah Zarah. And they even use wine in that service, and that wine that would be usher. But they never are menasich wine Avodah Zarah. So, Shulchan Aruch goes like most Rishonim who say that, listen. Most Rishonim hold that it's still Avodah Zarah anyhow. That's not our question for right now. Okay? For our purposes, they're Oved Avodah Zarah. So they're Oved Avodah Zarah. So but the thing is, when they're Oved Avodah Zarah, not in a way that could ever make Yayin Neser. They can make wine that's also a part of their service, that would be Issur Hana'ah. But they can't make Yayin Neser. So most Rishonim hold, what Ma'aseh is they're Oved Avodah Zarah. So the Shulchan Aruch started off with the words, Stam Yinishal Amimim Ovdei Kechavim. Any guy who's Oved Avodah Zarah, his wine is Issur Hana'ah. La'afuke, the other shita, which is what the Ramah brings, this other shita that says is, even if they're Oved Avodah Zarah, they are personally Oved Avodah Zarah, but there's no way that they can make they would make Yayin Neser. So then we have this kula that we could treat them essentially like this Ger Toshav, meaning they're not a Ger Toshav by any stretch. They are Oved Avodah Zarah, but they're Oved Avodah Zarah in a way they couldn't possibly make Yayin Neser. So in that case,
why is it living in the Muslims?
Because the Muslims, what they do is not Avodah Zarah b'chlal. They don't do Avodah Zarah at all. So they're like a Ger Toshav. They're a person who decided they're not doing Avodah Zarah. But these Goyim, they do it. They are even Avodah Zarah. So they're Avodah Zarah, but they just could never make Yayin Neser.
That's still part of their avodas.
So that's a subtlety. That's not what the Gemara said. The Gemara said if the guy doesn't do Avodah Zarah b'chlal, and the Muslims is like an extension of that. There are also people who don't do Avodah Zarah at all. These guys do Avodah Zarah. They just don't do exactly this specific type. Okay, so some Rishonim say that's good enough. Lamai says they'll never make Yayin Neser, and most Rishonim hold, which is what the Machar Pasuk say, that doesn't help. That Lamai says they're Oved Avodah Zarah, and therefore their wine is also. Okay, so now.
Even like they don't involve wine with flour.
Right. That's right. That doesn't do it. Lamai says Oved Avodah Zarah. It's not a Kashrus. It's like a loy plug. If they're Oved Avodah Zarah, then the wine is also. The fact that the Gemara 30 block later says that a Ger Toshav is in itself is a kula. It doesn't say that in Chavtes. When you look in the second part, it doesn't say anything about it. Some people go not having that din. I shouldn't say. There's another case in the second part that is, but I didn't tell you that case. A case of a katan, a guy who doesn't know it's there yet. Okay, now.
When they use wine, they do use wine in the service. It's also,
it's asabana. It's takruvas and mezor. So Meisher says, how can it be? He says, what's going on here? Well, Meisher, they use wine in the thing and it's also as takruvas. So Meisher says, no, it doesn't help. It doesn't make a difference. The Meisher says they don't make gai nesach. So some people that's enough. Just that they don't make gai nesach, so it wouldn't be us. Okay. So now the Ramah, when he brings his din. When he brings this din, this tzad l'hakol, okay, the Beverages didn't talk. The Shulchan Aruch is soisim over here that it's aser, and in many other places, all over these dinim in Stam Yayin, the Shulchan Aruch always talks about Yayin being aser b'ana. And in many places, we're going to mention some of them today. Many places, Ramah says, but nowadays it's not because and the Mechaber doesn't hold like that. Okay, most Rishonim hold that even nowadays, even the Catholics, their wine is aser b'ana. Okay, so now the Ramah, when he says this tzad l'hakol, says it in two stages. Okay, so first he said what you have here on the screen, yesh ermin, that for them it's not aser b'ana. Okay, and he doesn't tell you to look in Kuf Chav Daled, but it's a draw from those din in Kuf Chav Daled. Okay, now when he says the din, first he says is that you could be mekel in the case of hefsid. Okay, he said his example here was you could collect it as chayvim levdi kachavim. There's a din later on. The Ramah says, what happens if you worked for the guy and he paid you already, he paid you for your payment, and he gave you your payment, he gave you stam yayin. Okay, so these are examples where we say it's a hefsid, because if you don't take the money, you may never see your money. So it's considered a hefsid, you're allowed to collect it. What's his other cases? In Over V'Karna you already bought it. There's another case in the latest Shulchan Aruch where a person, another case like this, where a person rented out his boat or something else to haul stam yain, so you're not allowed to do that. That's considered having hana'ah. So the Ramah says, but in that case, you could keep the money once the guy paid you, because again, it's a hefsid. Your boat was already used for the past 2 weeks, so you're going to lose it. So it's also a hefsid. So these kind of things, if it's a case of a hefsid, again, a yerish, if you yerish stam yain. Right. Okay. So now, look, there's another case l'chara that fits into this case also. I don't have it on the screen for you, which is like this. What happens if a guy touches your wine? Okay, so it seems to me that if a guy touches your wine, if a Catholic would touch your wine, that there are places that touch your wine, l'chara, it would seem that in that case, it's an automatic that that's a case of a hefsid. Okay, there's all the cases of when you're trying to do business. If I don't buy the trade of wine, buy and sell it, then it's not a hefsid. But if you touch my wine, it's automatic hefsid because my bottle was worth $10, and now we touch it, and now it's worth $0. If it's Issur Hana'ah, it's worth $0. So it's an automatic case of a hefsid. There's a case about it later in the Ramah in Kuf Lamed days. Okay, where what happens is it talks about the Mechaber talks about whether you could get you could force the guy to pay you if he touched your wine. Can you collect damages from him in Ezekiel? You call him as a mazik because he touched your wine, he made it usher. Okay? So the Ramah over there says that's for sure no problem. The Shulchan Aruch talks about exactly what you could do, and the Ramah says for not a problem because nowadays wine is you don't have to worry about the Issur Hana'ah. So that's an order because it's an automatic Issur Hana'ah. When he touched your wine, once he touched it, that means that the $10 that you used to have is now worth $0. So it's an automatic case of hefsid. That's sort of automatic. Okay, so the first part of the Ramah is... No, the Shulchan Aruch talks about how you can collect from him. And the Ramah says, don't worry about any of those dinim, because it's automatic case of hefsid. It's an automatic case of hefsid, because I had a bottle of wine, and he touched it, now it became worth $0. So to say that it's aser b'hana'ah would be say that I lost all my money. That's an automatic case of a hefsid. The hefsid is built in. So the Ramah says, don't worry, you can collect fish. Okay, so now, then, this is the first part of the Ramah. He says there's such a shita, and he says, and you could be samach on the shita in the case of a hefsid.
So are you saying the Ramah, even though he said v'yesh makilin?
I didn't get the v'yesh makilin.
The original Ramah, v'yesh makilin. And he's new, and they says the type of ha'af.
I didn't say it. You're going to see that in a second. And that's the second part of the Ramah. The first part of the Ramah didn't say anything v'yesh makilin. The first part said is, you could be mekel in the case of a hefsid. That's what he said so far. So in the case of a hefsid, you could be mekel. Okay? He says, you already bought the stuff. By mistake, you ended up with 50 cases of cheap wine, so you can be samachat. It's a hefsid, you could be samachat. That's the first part of the Ramah. Okay. Now the second part of the Ramah, the last few words, is v'yesh mekil gam b'zeh. The Ramah says this: some people say that you could even be mekel v'hana l'chatchila. until now we just said is if you have a hefsid, then you could be samach on it. The yesh mekilim that even lechatchila you can go buy the stuff. You want to get into business, selling treif wine. Yesh mekilim gam b'zeh. Okay, that's what Ramah says. V'toiv lahachmir. Okay, the Ramah says is it's better to not be samach on the sheet. Okay, so the first was that you could be samach in makom hefsid. That's good. Everybody goes along with that. I mean, everyone in the world of the Ramah. The yesh mekilim gam b'zeh that you could make. Now, the Ramah in a few places, the Ramah gives the impression that, at least to me, that Ikar Hadin he really holds that it's mutter even l'chatchila. Okay, I'm going to tell you 3 places. Okay, the first is right over here. Is v'yesh mekil gam b'zeh v'toiv l'hachmer. Okay, v'toiv l'hachmer is not a ringing endorsement of the tzad l'chomer, right? V'toiv l'hachmer, it's nice to be machmer. Doesn't give you this strong feeling of he thinks it's really usher. Okay, the Ramah says v'toiv l'hachmer is sounding pretty power, if you want to say that. Another place is the Ramah has a case in Kuf Lamed Beis about a minig about selling wine to goyim. Okay, it's not important to us the case, but the point was the case was when you pour the wine to the goy, he's going to be kaina and owe you the money. It's going to be Issur Hana'ah before he owes you the money. The point being is once you're going to be having Hana'ah from Stam Yain. Okay, by the time he owes you the money, he already made the wine Issur because he touched it. Okay, so he was kaina. So that's the case over there. Okay, so the Ramah says is the minig is. He said the minig is we don't worry about that because Stam Yain is mutter b'hana'ah. Okay, he says because the guy nowadays don't put wine from with Zara, so it's completely mutter. He says don't worry. The Shulchan Aruch talks about the problem. There's kind of a problem that you're going to have Issur Hana'ah when you pour in the wine because he owes you the money. He said Ramah says don't worry about it, b'chal. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Okay, that's not the case in Hefsid. He says he didn't do it all the time. That's a standard procedure that people do that. Okay, sounding like he doesn't care about it at all. And in other cases, in Siman Kuf Ches, there's this din about pouring wine that's Stam Yain to do ziluf on it. You pour it, you make it smell good. And the Ramah says, the Mechaber talks about it being usher, and the Ramah says, don't worry about it, guys. Yeah, don't worry about it. Stam Yain nowadays is mutter b'hana'ah, so you don't have to worry about that din. Okay, the Ramah in Kuf Ches says, don't worry about it. Okay, so these 3 things that I told you all sound like the Ramah holds min hadin. There is no Issur Hana'ah. There's no real Issur Hana'ah. The title of it's a nice thing to be machmer. Okay,
why is it not the title of in that case? Let's bet it's either.
So it's a good question. So the Pri Chodesh says over there. The Pri Chodesh says the reason why the Ramah didn't say title of I can't tell you what the Pri Chodesh says. I'll tell you what he says. He says it's because since ziluf is not a Hana'ah mamish, I think it's his words is Hacha Deloy Havi mamish Hana'ah, because you're not getting full Hana'ah. I don't know what that means. Then, therefore, since it was only Toiv L'Hachmer in the first place, so the Ramah says, fine, do L'Chatchila. It was only Toiv L'Hachmer anyhow, so for a not complete Hana'ah, it was Deloy Havi Hana'ah Mamish. I don't know exactly what that means. So therefore, in that case, he didn't even bother being Toiv L'Hachmer. Okay? Now, but in those cases that I just told you, in those 2 places, the Shach is very upset. Okay? Again, each one of those cases, the Shach is very unhappy with what the Ramah says. Like in this case, he says, what are you talking about? He says, didn't you see in Kuf Chav Gimel that you're only supposed to do Makom Hefsid? He says, so what kind of this thing is that you're doing the Ziluf? Ziluf is Hana'ah. He brings Rayos on. Ziluf is Hana'ah. Ziluf is Hana'ah. So what are you doing? Just doing this L'Chatchila. Okay? Okay, I'm going to skip the other case. Okay. So the Shach sounds to me. There's a few Shachs about this. Sounds like he thinks that it's not that it's a nice thing to be machmir. That the ikar thing is that you should be machmir. And only the makom hefsed. The Shach is okay with being make of a makom hefsed. There are other places where the Ramah brings it in cases of hefsed, and the Shach is fine with it. The Shach tells you no problem, you can do it. Of course, because it's makom hefsed, you're allowed to do that. But it sounds like in this shaila should be makel even when there's no hefsed. The Ramah is more makel and just toiv l'hachmir as opposed to the Shach, who seems to be stronger about it. It seems to be pushing you should be machmir. Now, this is going to help us understand something we saw many weeks ago, which was we talked about whether you're allowed to be mabatal if something is added intentionally to another product, could it be batal? I don't know if you remember, there's a Rashba. The Rashba says that if you get something on purpose, it can't be batal, even if it's a tiny amount. Because bittul means is that it's not important. How can you say it's not important when I ate it on purpose? Okay? So there's a shayla, the machaber in different places. Some places he sounds like he holds like this Rashba. Some places like he doesn't hold. It sounds like he doesn't hold like. So Rabbi Teitz wrote to Rav Moshe, and he said, I'll tell you the nafkamina. The nafkamina is we're machmir for in cases when it's an Issur Hana'ah, and we're makel in cases when it's not an Issur Hana'ah. Hagam that the Rajba doesn't say that. The Rajba says even when it's not Issur Hana'ah. That's why Taitz won't say the Machaber Paschal like the Rajba in cases where it's Asur Hana'ah and not where it's not Asur Hana'ah. And Ramesh says, good answer. That's a good yishuv to explain why the Machaber sometimes is makel and sometimes he's machmir. Ramesh says, and therefore, now if that's the chiluk, therefore since we hold that Stam Yain is mutter b'hana'ah, therefore, when you add Stam Yain on purpose into Canadian whiskey, it's going to be mutter. Because we hold that Stam Yain is mutter b'hana'ah. L'dina, shamatir Stam Yain b'zman hazeh b'hana'ah, therefore, the Mechaber says, you don't have to be choshesh for the Rajba in that case. So you don't have to be choshesh for the Rajba in the case of Stam Yain for us. The Mechaber personally would have been machmir, but we wouldn't have to be machmir because we hold Stam Yain is mutter. Really? We hold that Stam Yain is mutter? I don't know. So I don't know if I would have thought like that by myself, but the way the Ramah is saying, that the way we're understanding the Ramah is saying, it's only the Toiv L'Hachmir, means really we hold that the Stam Yain is nowadays touched by a Catholic is not Asur B'hana'ah. But it's just Toiv L'Hachmir. So it comes to Toiv L'Hachmir. So Ramah says, the Ikra din is that it's mutter, and therefore for that other Rash we don't have to be machmir. Meaning the Shach might not agree to that. What?
Well, suppose there's a call, anything is mutter him shaf kar,
it's true. It could be himida. It could be himida. That's the Ramah's rule. That's the Ramah's rule from the beginning of Teres Chattas. You know that. The introduction, the Teres Chattas written by the Ramah. In the introduction, he says, the Ramah says, you're going to see in my sefer, I'm going to say many times that something is mutter b'shas chag, erev Shabbos. He says, what kind of thing is that? Things are not mutter on Friday. Is not. We don't let people off on Fridays. So he says that's because they have the ikra things like that. It's only mishum kvoido shel chacham that we're machmir for the other sheet. Okay, so maybe you could say that. Now, in contrast, I meant to put this on the screen, but I'm sorry I didn't. In contrast to that is the Chacham Sodom. Okay, Chacham Sodom, the Chayadim. The Chayadim in Hilchos Pesach. If you remember a few weeks ago, we spoke about karka and saffron, and we mentioned that there's a problem if you use saffron on Pesach. So over there, by that din, the Chayadim says, and you should know that there are goyim who take snuff, smelling tobacco, okay, and they sprinkle Stam Yain into it. He says, and therefore, you shouldn't use that because you're having hanah from Stam Yain. Okay? If you smell that, you're having hanah from Stam Yain. So Chayadim says you shouldn't do it. Okay? He says, because we know that Stam Yain is not mutter unless there's a hefsid. No hefsid. So what are you doing? You shouldn't have it. Okay, Mishmur brings this in Hilchos Pesach, go figure. Because it's by this din of a karka and for Pesach, so it like falls in there, this thing back a year round chashash in Hilchos Pesach. So, which is like the shach. Saying it's also unless there's a hefsid. And the Chacham Sodom, that's by us, Chacham Sodom says, again says that you should be machmir, and you should go like he doesn't use the word, but like the shach says, that only makom hefsid. But then he ends off, I just tell you that he ends off, if there's no hefsid, you should be machmir, which is what we're calling the shach. We can't be machmir, we can't protest against people who are makel because okay, there are those who make even lechatchila. I don't know if those means the Ramah who's being make lechatchila, or he means that there are those Rishonim who make lechatchila. So he says this. So therefore, you shouldn't protest when people are makel. This is all this part that I'm telling you now. It's not in the Mishmur. Okay, this is the Chacham. And the Chosha can be eaten shalonu halalu shahanias mitzuyah. Okay, there's an extra twist, which is in some of the cases where it has to do with business. There's an extra factor, which is, it's maybe automatic tzorech or hefsid, when you say to the guy, you can't be in business doing this thing, when people were so desperate, people were so poor, and so hard to find a way to make a living, to tell them you cut off another line of business might be in itself, like, qualifies as hefsid. Okay, so so I'm just saying there's a contrast here. The Ramah tends to be more makel. I see that maybe in the Moshe being like that also. And the Shach, and here the Chacham Sodom, Mishabur are being more machmir, saying that you should not be samech unless it's a machnas. Okay, now, I have, this if you remember last time, I'll tell you this. I'm passing the screen here. You remember last time we had 3 pshatim to be miyach to the stira as to why there's an Issur Stam Yain. I don't know if you remember this chart from last time. Okay. Anyhow, this is the thing. If you remember, for our purposes, the Torah says the following. He says, according to the middle reason was that the chasnus is why they made Stam Yain Asur, and the chashash of Yain Nesach is they would just say, just be careful, watch out for Yain Nesach. He says, the Torah says, according to that, we well understand that if you have a guy who doesn't pour wine from the Zohar, there's no possibility that he would give you Yain Nesach he said it's very easy to understand why you'd be Mako. He doesn't go for them all, of course, but it's very easy to understand why you'd be Mako according to that middle sheet. Okay, too complicated for me to say so quickly. Anyhow, okay. So now I have 5 cases of scenarios where this would be negay. Okay, so we talked about was whether Stam Yain should be Asabana. Okay, what's the example that we would have of Stam Yain being Asabana? Okay, so the first case is you want to give a gift to somebody. Okay, you have someone who's not Jewish who works for you, or who works next to you, and the next office over, and you want to give them a gift. You want to buy a bottle of treif wine. You buy a treif wine, you give it to the guy. Okay, so you're having Hana'ah from Stam Yain. Okay, so that's a case where there's no hefsid. Okay, so that's an example of where the Ramah says, Toiv Achmir, it's better to not, you don't have to get yourself into this, buy him a bottle of kedem wine instead. Okay, you shouldn't be doing that. And the Shach is for sure you shouldn't be doing this. There's no hefsid, but you for sure shouldn't be doing it. In the Ramah, we could talk about it. Okay, that's a simple case. Giving somebody a gift. Okay, buying a bottle of wine to give him his gift. The second one is the person wants to get into business. Okay, he's in business, and his business would involve selling Stam Yainim. Okay, well, if you own a liquor store, okay, and you want to sell Stam Yain, okay, can the guy buy it? Can he get into business selling Stam Yainim? Okay, so there's no hefsid, and no hefsid. So l'chara is part of the same machlokes. We just have to think about. You have to think about what I just said to you from Chacham Adam. Sometimes it's an opportunity, or it's some special reason why he has to get into it, that maybe it qualifies enough that it should be considered a tzorich or a hefsid, that he should be able to do that. He has to have permission from a rav to do that. What I'm saying is, giving a gift, B'chal doesn't come to that. But buying and selling, potentially, it might be such a special opportunity that we would say that for that guy it's a tzorich. Okay. The third case is regifting. Okay, regifting is where we say is if somebody gives you a present, okay, and then you want to give it to somebody else. So that means is somebody in your office gave you a bottle of treif wine. Okay, not that you went and bought it. The first case I told you was he went and bought it to give to the guy. Hey, someone gave it to you already. Okay, so l'chayra, to me, at least in this case, it sounds like there's no hefsid in that case because you have the bottle of wine. Someone gave you something that was to you worthless. It's treif wine. He gave you something worthless, so you throw it in the garbage. Okay, so to say, well, I could save money because I won't have to buy a present for the next person or for the person that I want to give a present to. Okay? To me, I don't hear that. What did you say?
Yeah, was Yerush.
Who was Yerush? Then it's similar.
And you see that I'm only mentioned that I think the hefsid.
Right, because it's l'chayra it's not a hefsid. Okay, now there are two people. I won't tell you their names. Two rabbinic people. Okay, one said who had reasons why this might be mutter. Okay, so you'll have to ask your rav. One said is. Sometimes you have a social obligation to give a gift. Okay? Sometimes you work in a company and you have a social obligation to give a gift. So you're going to be out money. It's going to cost you, $10 to go buy the person a bottle of wine. Maybe you have to spend $50 to buy a bottle of wine. Okay? You spend $50 to buy a bottle of wine. They have this one already. So it's like that. He said maybe that's considered hefsid also, because you're going to have to go spend money to save for this thing. Okay? Well, that wasn't so clear to me. And another rabbinic person, said maybe it should be mutter along the lines of the Pri Chodesh. They said is giving someone a present and you get the Tovas Hana'ah benefit that he appreciates that you gave him something, that's not a Hana'ah mamish. I don't know if you use those words. Remember I told you the Pri Chodesh says the Loi have a mamish Hana'ah, so maybe in that case the Ramah would be Mekel. No, I wasn't so convinced. Okay. So there are two other cases that are true, or that are relevant, but they're not so lamaisa. Okay, one is if a guy touched wine in my house. Okay, so the case is very lamaisa, that a guy could touch wine in my house. I have a bottle of wine that's open, that's not mavushal, he touches it. So that's however he gets it to make it, it's not relevant to how he does it. He touched it in a way to make it, but that can happen. That's a practical case. But the shayla of Issur Hana'ah is not so practical, because what are you going to do with this? If it was sealed, obviously, then it would make it usher. So it was open. So you have an open bottle of wine that the guy touched. So who are you going to give it to now? What are you going to have a hanach? Are you going to sell it to somebody? Are you going to give it to the clean lady to take home with her? What exactly? It's not so clean a way you can have hanach from it that we can have the shayla. It would be a case of a hefsid. It is a hefsid. We said, I told you before, and the Ramah says that in cases when he touches your wine, it's an order built in hefsid, but I don't see how you could recover it, that we could talk about Issur Hana'ah, except in the fifth case, which is, what happens if I own a winery? Okay, so, and now something went wrong, and the guy went to the wrong place and he touched the wine and made it usher. Okay, so in that case, it's a clear hefsid, and I have what to do with it. I'll bottle and sell the strafe. Okay, so then, or I'll sell it to a trade company who will bottle it. Okay, so in that case, everyone would be makel to say that you're allowed to sell it off and get hana'ah from it because assuming that he was a Catholic, assuming that the guy was a Catholic, he was not some other religion that actually pours wine from a jar, which actually there are some that actually pours wine from a jar. As long as you have to now talk to him, talk to his priest or his imam, and find out exactly what they do. But assuming that he's one of the Goyim Shalom, I don't know what the Rama called them, the Umas in our days that don't do like that, then in that case it would be mutter b'ma, so they could then.